Welcome everyone. Welcome to our Voices of Hope and Courage gathering this evening. Thought I'd open with some more beautiful sounds, given that we've already been serenaded by wonderful Celtic Grace, and we will continue to be throughout the evening, as all part of the evening tonight. My name's Ali, and I'll be guiding us through the process of the evening. And what we're hoping for is that this is a kind of gathering that is a special space, that is a fitting space for what we are going to be sharing about, listening about, and taking in, reflecting on, feeling this evening. And in a way, I think one of the real purposes of tonight was really to pose that question of what are healing spaces and what are healing pathways for us to work with the challenge of having grown up with problem parental alcohol use. What is the kind of space and the path that would work for us? And this evening is meant to be one way of doing that. And so I'd really like to warmly welcome you into that kind of a space. Thanks to the Lord Mayor, who has offered his house for us this evening. Thanks to Alcohol Action Ireland, who have brought us all here. Woo! Yeah. Thanks to our incredible guest contributors, of whom you will hear more shortly. Yes, there's one right here, and lots of them. And most of all, thanks to all of you. It's incredible to see such a gathering of us here in the Oak Room. So I am just wanted to say a few practical things about us being here in the space and feeling that we can, one aspect, I guess, of a healing space is feeling that we can settle in it, we can be in it as we are. So we're lucky to be here in the Oak Room. Bathrooms and so on are just out of this door and to the left. There are some refreshments out there. There'll be more at the end as well. But feel free to come and go as you need. We have the music playing throughout. If there's anything that you need, maybe either you could even go and speak to Connor and Owen at the back and they'll let me know, or come to me directly. We want this to be a space that works for all of us with our different needs, our different ways. Also with sound, we were thinking of using the microphones, both for the room and for the filming that's going to be happening here this evening. And maybe just to say about that, the main shape of this evening is to have 3 special conversations up here in the beautiful seats that we managed to get from the piano room. And really just invite you to sit back and to really take those in. And then the final part of the evening is to open it out to a bit more of a wider conversation for those who would like. So, and just to say, if you prefer not to be in the film later, this is just for us to share more widely, just approach Sheila or approach John, and we can manage that absolutely. So just feel relaxed in this space. And the other thing is, maybe just as I started, that how do we hold a space where we can also touch on things that are that hurt a lot, that may bring up strong feelings. And so again, it's just to welcome all of that. Alcohol Action Ireland does have a whole range of supports. There's information at the back, so that would be one thing. Or just taking care of your needs tonight. We're just so glad that you've made it out here and we've come and we're all here right now. So to formally begin, first of all, actually talking about Alcohol Action Ireland, who better than to hear from the CEO of Alcohol Action Ireland, Sheila Gilheany, to formally open and set the scene for tonight.
Thank you so much. Isn't Ali just lovely? She really, really is. You know, I have to say, we've been working with Ali on a few different events, and every time I always feel so relaxed myself, just to know that we're in very safe and capable hands with her. So my name's Sheila Gilheany. I work with Alcohol Action Ireland, and AAI has been going for about 20 years. And what we aim to do is to try and put forward the policy solutions, the actions that could try and reduce the harm from alcohol. So many of us know really, really do impact this country. And then about 5, nearly 6 years ago, a smaller group of people within AAI got together and said, there's a very particular type of harm that really needs to be articulated and needs to be talked about. And there were 3 individuals who came together, 2 of them here this evening, Barbara Whelan, Marion Rackard and Carol Fawcett. And they launched what we called Silent Voices, which sort of sounds like a contradiction in terms. How can voices be silent? Well, this is the point. a lot of voices had been silenced. It had been silenced over many, many years from in the home, but also in a wider context, in a wider here in society. There's such a thing about alcohol that there's a glorification of it. You know, we're subject to so much alcohol marketing that tells us that this is a product that is risk-free, that is essential to the economy, that is essential to your life, that is essential to every occasion, whether it's a birth, marriage, death, or whether it's just a Wednesday evening. It is seen as being and is portrayed in a particular way. But we know there's at least 200,000 children today living in a home that's impacted seriously by alcohol. And there's 1 million adults, there's a quarter of the adult population here in Ireland who are living with that legacy of having grown up with that issue in their home. And you know, childhood doesn't stay in childhood. The impacts are there and they can be carried forward. And there is a legacy that comes, you know, with that. So what Silent Voices has been trying to do over the last 5 years is research those issues, look at what might be helpful, see what's going on around the rest of the world, try and bring those solutions to policymakers, to people who are out there at the moment. And all of that work, that research and what we do 2 types of things. We get the research, we talk to researchers, we try to make sure that, you know, these issues are looked at, but we very much are informed by the lived experience of those who can illustrate that and who can really help us kind of point towards what it is we should be doing. So we maybe need to be looking at schools. We maybe need to have trauma-informed schools. We maybe need to have hospitals that understand kind of issues that maybe arise perhaps for people at a later date with physical illnesses, with mental illnesses that are there. We need social workers who understand this more. We need mental health professionals who understand this more. And I suppose, hugely, I'd be saying we need the whole of society to see this and to understand this and to allow these voices to be heard and to be heard clearly. So our event this evening is part of an overall set of events that we're holding this week. We're calling it End the Silence. We have 3 events this week, and we've also launched a podcast with one of our guests here this evening, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. And the idea in having this kind of concentration of different things going on at the same time is to raise those voices, raise them in the media. I'm very grateful, actually, we had a good bit of coverage this week on it. Raise it across the internet, raise it in social media, and raise it here this evening amongst people actually in the flesh and presence as well. So that's, I suppose, just putting into context what we'll be doing. I'm going to hand back, actually, because we're very grateful that we're here in the Mansion House. The Lord Mayor had hoped to be able to join us, but he wasn't, unfortunately, and it's very short notice, and I'm very, very grateful for this, is that Councillor Colm O'Rourke instead is taking his place, and really do appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheila. It's just good to be reminded of where we are and this incredible week that's going on. It has been going on for many years. So, Councillor O'Rourke, thank you so much for representing on behalf of the Lord Mayor, and it's wonderful to have you. So, yes, please do address us as we begin our event this evening. Colm O'Rourke.
Thank you both, and good evening, everyone. So, as mentioned, I'm Councillor Colm O'Rourke, and I'm deputising tonight on behalf of the Lord Mayor of Dublin, James Geoghegan. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it tonight, so he sends his apologies and also his best regards as well for the evening as well. So he was stuck with me. But therefore, I do have the absolute pleasure to welcome you to the Mansion House. This prestigious building in the heart of Dublin City has been at the centre of civic life for over 300 years. It is the official residence of the Lord Mayor of Dublin since 1715, and it has been welcoming international and local guests here in this room since then, and I'm delighted to add you to the list tonight. So as a politician over the past 5 years, you get to meet quite a lot of people, you go into people's homes, and you get to see and hear some of the issues. And unfortunately, alcohol harm in the home is one of those issues that I have encountered over the years as a local representative in my community. So therefore, parental problem alcohol use is an issue that goes right to the heart of Irish society, a society that traditionally was built on the family, and yet, as many people here tonight might understand, there are very few families in Ireland who haven't been affected by alcohol harm. And the estimates are that there are currently 200,000 children who are living with the traumatic circumstances of a childhood where problem alcohol use in the home unfortunately is a regular event, while a further 1 million adults are living with its legacy, and that's almost a quarter of the population. We know that growing up with alcohol harm in the home can have a multitude of impacts on a child's social, emotional, mental and physical well-being, some of which can last a lifetime if left untreated. And given the scale of the issue, you would expect that this would be discussed frequently in the media and elsewhere. Instead, there is a silence on this most hidden of alcohol harms, thanks in no small part to stigma and omerta in the family, where children quickly learn not to broach the topic either in the home or indeed outside. And yes, children are crying out to have their voices heard. The days of a child being seen and not heard belong firmly in the past. And that is why I'm delighted to open this event here in the Mansion House, which is part of a series of events that is aptly called End the Silence. Because it is only by facing up to and confronting the issues that arise from problem alcohol use in the home at events like this that healing can begin. Healing is the theme for tonight's event, which is called Voices of Hope and Courage. Healing is such a personal concept, and yet there are some common strands which will be explored by our participants tonight, and which hopefully can help point the way for others who might be at a different stage of their healing journey. And it is that journey, one that is both hopeful of a brighter future, but which takes a great deal of courage to begin, because facing up to and confronting the demons of our past is not an easy thing to do. So I sincerely hope that by listening to the voices of hope and courage tonight, that maybe some people might find inspiration to start or stay on their healing path, to know that there are supports out there to help you along the way, and most of all, to know that you are not alone on your journey. So thank you once again, and you're all very welcome to the Mansion House, and I look forward to meeting you all this evening. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Councillor O'Rourke. It feels good to be welcomed, to know we're officially meant to be here, and it feels right to be here. So thank you for your words. I was just thinking, hearing you speak, that actually that welcome, knowing why we're here, it's wonderful to have the host or representative of the host welcome us, but also it's a question we could ask ourselves. Why are we here? Why am I here? That's certainly one I've been asking while we've been working on this project. It's been months of kind of tending this idea of this evening and thinking of how to make it be something that would be beautiful and something that would be good. So we just wanted to open up a moment for all of us here to invite you to just take a moment to ask yourself the question, why am I here tonight? Why have I come tonight? What is it? What drew me here to the Oak Room of the Mansion House for Voices of Hope and Courage this evening? And this was one way we wanted to enjoy the music that was playing. So maybe just while the music creates a space, just taking a moment to connect to our bodies, to any thoughts, feelings that might be there, and just hold that question. Why am I here tonight? And what's alive for me? What draws me into this conversation in this space? And I'll just give a moment for us to see what's there. wonderful. It's amazing to get the chance to be contemplative with live harp supporting us. So yeah, just really welcoming all of our, whatever it is that drew us here tonight. It's a whole range of different things, that's all really welcome and good to have here in the space. So with that, I feel like I would like to move to into the stage of the next part of our evening, which, as I said, is going to be 3 incredible conversations, explorations, readings, interspersed with our music. So yeah, just inviting you to kind of settle in and be ready for that next section of the evening. And I actually had a little idea about setup, so just give me a moment. I just thought that this is an idea I'm going to do. So just seeing can you hear me if I see Marion shaking her head, but some other people, oh, no, she's nodding now, thank goodness. Okay, so this is part of, I really love trying to find ways to make, the spaces work for us in all sorts of different ways, and I'm sure there's loads of things I haven't thought of. Our first conversation. So for our first of our 3 incredible guest contributors this evening, I am really delighted to introduce the amazing Aisling Creegan. Aisling is an artist. She has a degree in fine art. She also has a degree in counselling and psychotherapy. And I was actually thinking, looking at her art, that connection of both the artistry and her connection to herself and to people, both of those really come through. And no more so than in her latest piece of art, her latest work, her latest masterpiece, you could say, something very personal and very powerful, is her book, I Am Someone. And that was published in 2022 and is something that is really, in a way, kind of launched out into the world and made our connection with Aisling and why she is here this evening. And actually, I'm going to ask a little bit more before, once I invite Aisling up. So without further ado, could you please join me in welcoming Aisling Creegan to the stage? Bring that in a bit. Should we bring it close? Yeah. Thank you. That's good. And just, thank you, yes, I knew there was a second microphone in order there. Just one that I was going to ask it, but I thought I wanted to wait till you were here, Ash. But just, if you've heard of the book, I Am Someone, would you mind raising a hand? Yes, wonderful, yeah. And I actually just thought I wanted to say this anecdote, because I was actually over in Limerick 2 weeks ago, and I was talking to someone, I was talking about our event, and then I was saying about your book and so on, but I hadn't named the book or you. And she said, is that Aisling Creegan? Is it I Am Someone? She said, that's an amazing book. Really? And yeah, and it was just such a lovely feeling to be on the other side of the country and to hear people talking about your work. So anyway, so there's a little intro to what is in store. Aisling, and I know also I can call you Ash, so I may be moving about between us two. Anything you'd like to say to start us off as we open this conversation?
Well, actually, first of all, can everyone hear me? Down the back you can. Well, first of all, look, I just want to wholeheartedly thank Silent Voices for inviting me here tonight. It means the absolute world. And I would like to thank every single one of you for coming here tonight as well. I'm also mindful of the people who weren't able to walk through that door tonight because maybe they would have felt shamed or, embarrassed. But you know what? There's strength in numbers. So if tonight can even help one person here in this room, it'll be all worth it. And by the way, just to let you know, I have a tremor. It's from old head injuries as a child. So just in case you're wondering what that's about, it's a legacy I have. But look, I'm alive and well and very happy.
Thank you, Ash. Can we just see it? Would you mind holding up?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's
okay. So here it is,
the book,
the famous "I Am Someone." Okay, so maybe just really, as I mentioned, honouring the publication of your book, and I spoke to you about my experience of reading it. And I thought that Aisling's book would be, in a way, as a way into our conversation tonight. And so, as I said, we're looking at what are the voices of hope and courage around having grown up with an experience of parental alcoholism, having grown up with problem parental alcohol use, and how that impacts any child that's having to experience that. And I was thinking about your book, that's not the only thing that was going on in your family life, in your family experience. Everyone's family is going to be different. And yet your parents' alcoholism was a thread that ran through. It was not the only thing, but certainly in your story, it recurs again and again. So I just wondered whether, obviously people have to read the book and there's a whole lot more as well, but just in our conversation tonight, how would you distill that? Like, what was the real impact on you of your parents' alcoholism?
Well, to be honest with you, from a very young child, I would have felt actually responsible for my parents, because I needed my parents to work to provide food for me, because if I didn't eat, I was going to die. I was too small to get a job. And so I remember numerous nights going down, my father would just get drunk and fall over furniture, and he would fall asleep downstairs in a chair, and I would go up and down numerous times to tilt his hair. For some reason, I kind of knew at 7, 8 years of age that his circulation could be cut off.
Oh.
I don't know how, but I remember the weight of his head, and I'd be bringing his head straighter and propping it up with pillows. And I'd also be, kind of rolling Mammy on her side as best I could. She was a fine big woman, but I would always roll her on her side so that she wouldn't choke during the night. Also, I have a brother in residential care. He's 4 years older than me. He has a mild learning disability. And I also felt quite responsible for him when he came home at the weekends, so that he wouldn't be in, let's say, my mother's target range. I have a lot of very severe OCD. That gets worse if I'm tired or stressed. So sometimes, I have to turn lights on to make sure they're off in the first place. Ridiculous carry on, but I've broken numerous door handles to make sure they're locked. Now, my wife, Susan, is here tonight, and my mother-in-law, and I have a brother here tonight as well. And I have to say, they have been an absolute tower of strength, an absolute tower of strength. And the other thing I have, which I didn't realize, I actually have PTSD, and I discovered it. It was a horrible discovery a few weeks ago. I was at the kitchen sink, and I wear 2 hearing aids, and I always hear Susan coming up behind me, but suddenly I just felt this hand on my shoulder, and I swung around, and I think I gave Susan as much of a fright as I did, because for that millisecond, I was being violated. I was that child again. And that was simply from Susan putting her hand on my shoulder. It was because I didn't see her coming. And I never realised that I had PTSD before. But look, sure, I suppose it makes sense. It's a given, really, considering. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's and hyper-vigilant regarding safety in the home. There was always frying pans left on. There was always plugs in pools of water. There was always gas, burst this, burst that. And it would have been me going around being extra vigilant, and I still am to this day. So every time we go somewhere, poor Susan says, just get into the car. You get into the car, I'll check everything's off. Mm. So yeah, they would have been the main effects.
And this, when you speak of the complex PTSD, that is also very bad things happen because your parents weren't caring for you. They were drunk or not there.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. We needed our parents, but they were scary people. Well, actually, my siblings, I don't know any of my siblings' histories, and we would all have a different history. I adored my father, but I was just turned 10 when my father died. He had just turned 54 years of age. And he was actually, I remember before he died, he used to pray to die, you know, and he used to sit up in the bed and just watch traffic going up and down the main road. I absolutely adore that man. And when he died, I have to say, I did wish it was my mother, you know, until I sought counselling and I could see the other side, you know, and I got to know my mother through counselling.
And anything you want to say? I was thinking, just because you've named your dad, anything to say about your mother that in the...
Absolutely. I mean, you know, up until I had numerous breakdowns, but when I was 32, I had a serious breakdown on the M50, and it was like 30 years of tsunami. Every single car coming on the M50, I actually thought was my mother. It was an embodiment of my mother. And apparently it was -6 that night, and I disappeared for about an hour, and I came up and I was mucked from head to toe, so I must have gone down into the embankment or something. And it was actually my sister-in-law said, you need help, you need counselling. And the next day I went for counselling. I was ready to speak. And you know, through that's why counselling is so important, and good therapists, because through counselling, I was able to think about my mother's life. She had her regrets. You know, she got her scholarship to do nursing. She wasn't able to follow it through because she had to work in the family business. She also had an awful trauma. She had to give up a child when she was only very young herself. And of course, in those days, she held that secret for 50 years. And she could have taken that to her grave. It was just when she got cancer that we all had to be screened. So she actually had to track him down herself through the Red Cross. Mm-hmm. And when I learned more about my mother's story, I thought, you know, that was hard. That was hard. But those days were very, very hard. And, you know, I remember my mother said to me, you know, you have another brother. And I wrapped my arms around her and I said, why didn't you tell us sooner? And she said, you have no idea. She said, my mother came from a very small country town. So you just literally had to get on, pack your little bag and disappear. And she was very lucky, actually. She didn't end up in one of these Magdalen laundries. So I learned to forgive my mother. I learned to see her not as a mother, because I've no experience of a mother. My mother never hugged me tenderly, or she never said I love you, or she never. But that doesn't upset me because I've no experience of it. But I was able to see her as flesh and blood and a woman who had hard times. And so through that, I learned to forgive. And it was like someone took the shackles off me. Now, a lot of people don't understand, how could you forgive your mother? But you know what? We don't set out to hurt people. You know, it's a generational thing. Her mother was a very tough woman, and it's generational.
Mm-hmm. And just to give some context for all of us, that while both your mother and your father were alcoholics or had an alcohol problem, it was actually your mother who really was a perpetrator of violence against you.
Absolutely.
So
But the thing was, by the time my mother had me, she was 42, and she was really quite psychotic at that stage. And, you know, one of her mantras to me would have been, I should have drowned you at birth. And I used to remember thinking, well, why did she have so many of us? But sure, contraception wasn't available then. We have to, you know, we forget that. You had to go up to the north to have contraception. So women had no choice but to have all these kids. And actually that's a topic that we could look at as well. Not every woman wants kids. Or, you know, I've met a couple of women who say, you know, that I actually don't enjoy being a mother.
I mean, this leads us into what I was thinking was, yes, not everyone needs to have children. And there are many non-parents who, on the other side, can play a very precious and cherishing and good role for children while not being a parent. And I don't know if that's actually the case, but I wanted to lead, I'm thinking, you know, we just wanted to set the scene here. I do really recommend that you read Ash's story, but, you know, just to I think you just touched on a glimpse of the horror of this experience, being a child in that environment with your dad and particularly with your mom. And the thing I sort of wanted to lead into was, you know, I think the question brings up is, how did you survive? How did you get through this? Where there's, you know, I know there's so much creativity and imagination and playfulness and strength that comes through your story. And just to say, I was also going to ask, was there anyone who helped or helped open a door for you? But yes. Yeah, just however you want to respond to that.
Yes. When I was about 7, I was diagnosed as mentally retarded, as they called it in those days, and I was about an inch away from being institutionalized. And I remember looking at these 3 adults. You know, my 2 parents were going, "Yeah, fine, if put her wherever you want to put her." And the I think she was somebody from the health board, but anyway, I remember she never even acknowledged me. But you see, that was the way it was in the 70s. In the 70s, there wasn't the tools to deal with kids the way hopefully there is now. But I remember this woman who was saying, "Yeah, Aisling is mentally retarded," didn't even look at me in the eye, you know, greeted my, pulled chairs out for my parents, but didn't pull a chair out for me. And I remember thinking, "You're actually talking about my life here." And I remember thinking silently, because I didn't have the words, I remember thinking, there's nothing wrong with me. If one of you just ask me plain and simply what's going on, I'd actually tell you. But I wouldn't betray my parents at the same time. You know, you have this kind of distorted loyalty to your parents, no matter how bad they are. But a teacher stepped in and she gave me permission to use her name. Moira was her name. And she gave me these one-to-one lessons. Now, I can't even remember what the lessons were about, but that's irrelevant. The fact is, she was there in the same room, the same day, the same time, week after week. And it was that consistency amid all the chaos at home that gave me it instilled my faith in humans again. And you know, it only takes one person to pull you through in life. And I actually got to meet her 40 years later. I met her at the book launch in Eason's, and this time I had the words to thank her. And I mean, that woman could have been dead, she could have been in Timbuktu. So talk about a gestalt, you know, moment. I mean, my God, it was just full circle. It was absolutely amazing experience. So yes, oh yes, and actually, I'll read a piece here. But I'll actually read a piece just about the chapter. Okay, so basically I was going to this tomorrow for a few months. And so one day I arrive as usual, ready to sit down and practice my reading. And my teacher says, "Aisling, would you mind helping me set the table for the other pupils? Because you don't need to come for extra lessons anymore." But I thought they were going to put me into an institution, I protest. "Nobody's going to put you in an institution because you're now as good as everyone else." Oh, I feel so, so proud. And I decide that today is the best day of my life. When the bell rings at the end of the day, I run home, dying to tell Mammy my news when she gets in from work later on. It might make her happy to know that I've done so well. After running breathlessly through the back door, I come across Mammy in the kitchen. She must have a day off because she isn't usually home until the evening. I blurt out my news while she raises a cup of tea to her lips. Without notice, the mug comes flying in my direction and smashes against the back door. I run straight out to the back garden and I wait for ages until it's safe to go back inside. It doesn't matter what Mammy thinks. I can take comfort in my achievement in school. I'm aware that this experience is sending me on a new path. My teacher has instilled in me a new faith in humans, and someday when I have the right words, I will thank her.
You definitely have the right words, and you definitely have the strength, the courage, the clarity to bring this story out. It's absolutely incredible. So just as we're coming into the last part of our conversation, I mean, you touched on it as you were speaking earlier, but as we were saying tonight, we're looking at, well, how do we work with these absolutely horrendous experiences? And you're an example of someone that really has. And I know you have your own training in psychotherapy, but there's also be other things that you've done. So yeah, just anything you wanted to say around what sort of healing pathways worked for you, or how did you address this?
Well, I have to say, like I said, I had my last breakdown when I was 32. And, you know, I was actually homicidal and I was terrified I was going to kill somebody. And I thought to myself, if I kill somebody, I end up in prison, the problem is still there. So it was me that had to change because I knew my mother would never change. So I found an absolutely fantastic counselling centre, and that saved my life. Therapists, especially therapists that are trained in alcohol addiction, are paramount. I mean, we can't have enough funding behind counselling centres. And that's when, through that counselling, I learned to forgive my mother. And by forgiving my mother, I gave myself back my freedom. Even though already I was neurologically and physically damaged by my mother, it still gave me great freedom. And I was able to see my mother and love her as an older person who is now vulnerable, not as a mother, but an older person. And also I went back to doing what I loved as a child. And that is so important. Growing up is completely overrated. You know, what we need to do is, whether it's beating on drums, running uphill, singing, dancing, sewing, we all have something, even time out. If that's your thing, that's what you need to follow through on. And painting was my thing. I didn't paint for years because, you know, at one stage my mother, she walked all over my drawings when I was a child, and she was wearing stilettos and she just punched holes through them all. And I have to say that took a bit of my soul from me. But I've gone back to painting now, and I feel like I'm just like a child now, and it's fantastic. You know, I'm back. I'm 7 again painting. You know, so absolutely.
Wonderful. That is, I mean, it's just such a perfect example. And actually, despite that horrific moment from your mother, throughout the book, there's all these times when you're drawing and painting, and it almost gives confidence that things can cycle around. Even if there was a period where naturally you stopped painting, it's very clear when you look at your website, there's so much work there. It's your daily practice. It is a way that you be you, just as you were as a small child.
Absolutely.
So incredible. Thanks, Ash. I guess what I was thinking to bring this conversation to a close was just what is so clear is the strength of your experience and the incredibly negative impact of your experience, and yet how shining and strong you are. And for me, it was like transformation is possible. We can go from the depths into great strength, maybe even because of that, not that we would ever wish it, but it's all in you. And I think everything, even the way you've named the book, I've heard you share, we had a podcast out this week with Marion and you, and talking about the title of the book, or you might say that you've really turned something from the past into something shining. And I wondered if you wanted to, you may want to say that about the way you named the book, and then also maybe to close our conversation, how you've again turned around what could be something so damaging and cruel into something that is a source of your strength.
Yes, I mean, believe it or not, I wanted to call this book You Are Nothing, because that was my mother's mantra to me. Don't you ever forget you're nothing. You never will be anything. You never were anything. So I decided to turn those criticisms on their head and turn them into a positive. So you are nothing. You are everything. Each cell, every molecule, root and bud. You were never anything. You have always been present, ageless, timeless, flourishing and building momentum. And you will never be anything. Accept all of nature, shedding, renewing, bending, splitting, healing. Your fingerprint is yours alone. You are unique. Nothing can imitate you. Celebrate the very existence of you and burst through that bud. Thank you.
So, the amazing Aisling Creegan. So this was the beginning. We've opened, thanks to Ash. Conversation number 1, we're going to move into the middle and then on to the final conversation. And maybe just inviting a moment to take a breath and I love that getting to clap is in a way to show our energy and connection. I feel moved and enriched by the conversation we just had. So, if you have the energy, the attention, the heart to continue, which I'm sure you do, I am delighted to introduce our second guest contributor this evening, or I say guest, but really she's actually one of the founders of what we're doing here tonight with Silent Voices. Barbara Whelan, she has a background in law. She was a solicitor in a previous life, also has a degree in theology. I know actually I've discovered a contributor to the Living Word programme on RTE Radio 1 and A Word in Edgeways, which I've listened to now and it's very beautiful. And I think stems from actually, Barbara's also a very long-term mindfulness practitioner. But most importantly, maybe related for us tonight, is one of the founding voices of Silent Voices. So maybe just to name those three founding voices was Barbara Whelan, Marion Rackard and Carol Fawcett. And certainly that Marion and Barbara are all still very active with us and part of what we're doing here this year and hopefully for many years to come. So without further ado, we're delighted to have Barbara Whelan. Great. So, hi, Barbara.
Hi.
I was thinking it was lovely actually as we started the conversation with Ash and then got into also hearing Ash read her words. And it's actually it's different, isn't it, to hear a writer read and then also to have the conversation. And in fact, that fits quite well with how we were thinking of our conversation, is maybe we could flow straight into you reading, because you are also a writer and we're looking forward to your book. But here we get some an advanced reading. So shall we start off that way? Or if there's anything you want to say to open, but
no,
yeah,
that sounds good.
To hear a reading would be wonderful.
Yeah, okay. So this little piece is about going to Irish College in Ranafast in Donegal, and it's entitled Ranna Fersta, 1972. Roisin couldn't believe it. Here she was in Irish College, Ranna Fersta, Donegal. She hadn't realised it was so far from Dublin. It had taken them almost all of yesterday to get here. Imagine, there were places in Ireland where it took a whole day to get to. They stopped in Omagh on the way. It was the first time she'd ever been in Northern Ireland. She bought lots of packets of opal fruits and milky bars for Sinead, Emer and Brian in case they didn't stop in Northern Ireland on the way back. She was glad that her best friend Anne-Marie was with her. Mam had driven the two of them to Parnell Square to catch the bus to Donegal. She couldn't wait for Irish College, but she'd never been away from Mam for 3 weeks before. She didn't think she'd miss her dad, though. It was still bright when they arrived in Ranna Fersta. When Roisin got off the bus, she stopped and stared at the sea. In the summertime, Mam sometimes brought them to Dollymount Strand for the day. They'd go with the picnic of banana sandwiches and milk in empty salad cream bottles that Mam kept specially for picnics. Roisin's job was to screw the lids on really tight so the milk didn't spill out. Mam said if they had a cow and a banana tree in their garden, she wouldn't ever have to go to the shops. We'd be self-sufficient, she said. Self-sufficient. She and Anne-Marie were put in the same house. After dinner, they had to say the rosary, and the Banatee was shocked when Roisin told her that they didn't say the rosary at home. "Hear that, Luna," the Banatee said, and off they went. So here they were the next morning in the Cllr. First they were given their names in Irish and told that they would be called by their Irish names all the time they're at the Gaeltacht. Roisin's name was Roisin Murphy in English, but because Roisin is Irish anyway, she thought she'd only get one new name. But no, in Donegal, Roisin is called Roisin, so she was going to be Roisin Ní Mhurragu for 3 weeks. Roisin sighed. You could almost hear the wind in it. Anne-Marie wasn't too happy with her Irish name. It was very long. Áine Móra Ní Ghealachóir. Then the Ábhársta told them all the rules, but it was all in Irish, so she didn't understand much. A few minutes later, a priest said that there would be Mass every day at 1 o'clock, and after that they would give out any letters that arrived for them. Roisin knew it was just to get them to go. The priest's name was Murphy too, and in Irish he was called An Tathair Seosamh Ó Murchú. The same name as Roisin, except in Irish he was Ó Murchú, not Ní Murchú, because he was a boy. He looked nice. Roisin liked his eyes. They were sort of soft. Roisin wondered what it would be like if An Tathair Seosamh Ó Murchú was her father instead of her real father. But then she remembered that Sister Eugenie at school said that priests can't be fathers. Roisin wondered what Sinead, Emer and Brian were doing. She missed Mam a bit already. She loved Mam, like really, really loved her. Once she told Sister Eugenie that she loved her Mam with all her heart, with all her soul, and with all her mind. But Sister Eugenie said that the only person you can love with all your heart and soul and mind is God. Roisin didn't care. She did love her Mam with all her heart and all her soul and all her mind. Suddenly Roisin started to worry. Now that she wasn't at home, she wouldn't be able to pour all the funny water from the bottles that Dad hid everywhere over Mam's plants. Maybe Mam would find out, because the plants might stop dying, and then she'd know that it was Roisin who was killing her plants, because she was the only person who wasn't there. Then she remembered that she wasn't allowed to talk about Dad's bottles. Once she did ask Mam, but Mam said not to say anything to her Dad, as he'd just get cross. Roisin didn't like it when her Dad got cross. Sometimes at night she imagined things, like Mam was crying. One night when Roisin was very sad, she cried, but really quietly so no one would hear her. She talked to God that night and asked him, would he be able to arrange it that Dad would have a heart attack that didn't hurt, and that he'd die, and then they'd have a funeral like they had for Uncle Stephen, and everyone would say prayers and say how nice he was, and then he'd be gone, and it'd be just Mam and Roisin and Sinead and Emer and Brian. She knew it was a sin, though, to pray that someone would die, so she went to confession the next day and told the priest that she'd had bad thoughts. Go away at that and stop your fooling, girl, he said. Only boys have bad thoughts. So she said sorry and told him that she'd been disobedient instead. She got 3 Hail Marys for being disobedient and 3 Our Fathers and Glory Be for telling lies about having bad thoughts. Anne-Marie gave her a poke. Guess what? We're in the same class. Roisin smiled. Anne-Marie was her very best friend. They had met in junior infants. Last year they promised each other that they would be best friends forever, and they would always tell each other everything. Everything, laughed Anne-Marie. No secrets. But Roisin never told Anne-Marie about Dad and the bottles of funny water. They picked up their school bags and ran to find Rongado. Roisin hugged her friend. They would be together for 3 whole weeks. 3 whole weeks before Roisin Ní Murchú had to return to being Roisin Murphy.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And I was actually thinking that one of the things we were considering for our gathering was really, when we talk about silent voices, how the voice of the child is with us. You know, here we are, adults here tonight, but what about our children? And thank you for your work of bringing in the voice of the child really in such a special way. And I guess now here we have Roisin. I won't attempt to say it in Irish as a non-speaker. And so this is, in a sense, it's a work of fiction, or maybe I ask you, because basically what I want to lead into is, I know this is creative writing as such. However, there is also Barbara, and there is a relationship between your own experience, I think, as a child and a child in a family where there was alcoholism.
Yes.
And yeah, just anything you want to touch on just briefly around that, of how do you get from this incredible piece of writing, but also how does it connect to your own experience as a child?
Well, it is in essence a snapshot of my childhood in fictional form, like confession time. I am the little child in the fictional piece. And it was a piece that really just wrote itself one evening. And it was afterwards, when I was reading it, I realised that unconsciously or unwittingly, I had captured really so many things about how growing up with parental alcohol misuse had impacted. And I think very often I only realised that there was something not right at home when I wasn't there. So when I moved out, it could have been something simple like going to play in another friend's house, or going to Irish college. And also then in being in situations where it would be normal to enjoy yourself, always being a little bit anxious because you had one eye back at the ranch worrying about what was going on there. So really finding it very hard to let go and just enjoy yourself, and something that it still dogs me a little bit today. So that was one of the things that struck me. I really did pour the alcohol on my mother's plants. We have a beautiful new plant given to us, and my mother was over recently, and she said to me, I was always used to Lisette looking after indoor plants. I could never get them to grow. And she's 92, and I still hadn't the heart to tell her actually it was me who was killing your plants. But of course, what it was a child's desperate attempt to try and stop the drinking. And it's only later years you realise you actually can't stop another person drinking. But the big thing that came through it for me was the no talking. It was such a big thing in our family. And I actually do have a very good friend. She's not called Anne-Marie. She's still my very best friend. And I remember coming home from school one day, and there was something, I don't know what was happening at home, and I started to cry because I didn't want to go home. And she was very concerned and asking me, what was wrong. And I just kept saying, I can't talk. I'm not allowed to talk. I'm not allowed to talk. And it was 25 years later before I really told her what was going on at home all those years ago. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Oh, that's so clear. It's just like the anxiety that's there for the child, the incredibly creative but desperate strategies, and then this silence. It must not be said outside the home and outside the family. And just on the note of talking, I just noticed now that we've done the reading, can you hear, just as we move to the second conversation with Barbara, or we have a second microphone, is it okay to hear for people at the back? Yeah, okay. Yes. Go, great. Owen's saying yes. Okay, wonderful. Because it's nice, it's more relaxing this way, isn't it? Yeah. So I guess, so that's interesting, as you say, when it took 25 years before you told your best friend. That injunction, the sort of known injunction of the family is so strong. And I suppose that's what we'd wanted to kind of lead into, was this was your child experience, already an incredible burden and frightening, terrifying thing for a child to have to be holding. How, because I know you as Barbara, like when as getting to know you, it's like you've got a large family of your own, you're a successful leader in your work life, you just you founded this campaign, you're just such an incredible person. And I was thinking, how, a bit like we're talking to Ash, how do you do it? But I know that this experience in childhood did impact you as an adult. And I just, wonder, is there what you'd like to say about that? Because that's kind of what we're trying to open up here, isn't it? How did that impact you?
In many ways, I was a very, very anxious child. I was a desperately shy child, to the extent that when I had my own children, I always felt that if I had a child who was as shy as I was, I would try and get them help. And it was only later years I understood that can come from being deeply shamed. So it was something I'd always struggled with. But it really was mental health for me. I was, very anxious. Looking back, between 15 and 17, I was suffering from depression. But then at 17, I went to college, met my now husband, and we went on and, had our own family. And it was a very happy part of my life. And while I did feel anxious from time to time, I found ways of coping, and life was just busy. So I didn't ever run away from it, but just life was naturally busy. But if you've been through childhood adversity, you find that you have a vulnerability to stress. And in my late 30s, I had a lot of stress in my life on all fronts. And my past came back to haunt me, as I say. And then over a 3-year period, I went through 2 breakdowns, 2 periods of depression. And when I thought life couldn't get any worse, I went through stress-related burnout. So that's when life really did fall apart. I couldn't work any longer, so I had to say goodbye to my career. It takes a few years to recover. But I did get very, very good help, and I survived, and here I am. So, that's the way life goes. It can come back to haunt you, even if you externally and in practice. There's another side of it that's quite strong. But I think human beings, we're very resilient, but we're a lot more fragile than we think.
Yeah. Barbara, it's just actually the life and death nature of this is actually really what's coming out for me this evening, because and it was there as we were talking with Ash as well, but it's like, as children, almost like wishing your parent would die. That was in your story, that was in what Ash said. And then as the survivor, this really saying, and I've heard many of us say it, well, at least I am alive. Incredibly, I'm alive. I've survived. And it's not a small thing.
No.
And it doesn't happen for everyone.
No, that's true. You do feel a huge amount of gratitude for that afterwards. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's not to say, oh, great, now, but it's just
Yeah.
that it's on a knife edge. It's,
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, thank you for being willing to share with us, because I think this is what we're wanting to open up around adults that have experiences as children.
Yes.
It really is can be the breakdown of your life as an adult.
Yes.
And that's, I think with you it's interesting because there's a lot of richness and a lot that was working, and then there was this break point where you had to face these significant impacts.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. But it's a very difficult narrative to bring into the public space. And I think that, the stories that we hear in public tend to be from people who have had a difficulty with alcohol and who have come through that. And I think that is very important. I think it's really important to hear those stories. I think it takes an extraordinary amount of courage to come through alcohol misuse. But the difficulty is that that narrative doesn't paint the full picture of alcohol misuse. And in particular, it doesn't show the devastation, I think, that it leaves in its wake, and particularly the impact it has on relationships, and in particular, the relationship, the parent-child relationship. Bonds of trust are so often shattered, and sometimes they're irretrievably broken. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, it's a really, really difficult narrative to bring into the public space. And I sometimes think it's because maybe we don't like, we like kind of good news stories. We don't really like that murkier side of alcohol. But I also think that it is a story and a narrative that challenges us as a society to really look collectively at the relationship we have with alcohol in this country. And I think in Ireland, we don't like doing that. So someone like me is very often seen as a party pooper. And so it's difficult. And I also think too that maybe the silence comes from a concern that anything would be said or done to increase the stigma that surrounds alcohol misuse. And that's really important. I think we really do need to reduce the stigma that surrounds alcohol misuse. But I don't think that can come at the expense of the child. I don't think that children, or at least adults, as children, should be silenced. I think we have to find another way of dealing with stigma, because, it's the adults and the children who all remain silent,
Is it something to do with the complexity of it as well? Like, I was thinking of, if you, like in the wider civic space, if there is anything said about alcohol, it might be more from this recovery, an alcoholic who has recovered. So it's usually afterwards, oh, I was alcoholic, but now I have recovered. And is it then, does that create a tension that it is hard for us to also lift up and have equally, if not more, as strong the experience of the child of an alcoholic parent? Because in a way, they're two different stories of a bigger picture.
Absolutely. And certainly that has been the real struggle that I have had in my own personal life, and anecdotally with others. My father stopped drinking when I was 19. So up until the age of 19, life very much revolved around his drinking. And then after the age of 19, life revolved around his recovery. And the difficulty is, if you've been through difficulties in childhood, they don't necessarily come out at the same time as the person who's had a difficulty with alcohol. So in my case, my difficulties emerged 2 decades after he'd stopped drinking. So, in my family, it was this, old news, past story, and why would you be sort of talking about that stuff? Sure, don't let least sleeping dogs lie. And the big thing in our family was, don't do anything to jeopardize his recovery. So that then further impacted, or I don't know, it seemed to just, it left me with the feeling that I shouldn't talk about this to anyone, even to get help, because by doing so, that will be being disloyal or unforgiving or whatever. So that, rule of silence in our house lived on. So really very difficult. And that's something that I've heard from others. It's quite common. So
just taking a moment to really get that, because I think as we're sort of opening up, what is the silence of silent voices, and one is the silence in the family, but then that actually lived on, even as adults, even once your father is in recovery, there's still an injunction around what can be said and can't be said. And I hear that complexity now. There's a complexity of very different experiences. Like a parent, anyone who has got an addiction is no doubt suffering, or there's a very good reason for that. So they have their story. If they're able to go in recovery, then that's a very powerful and flourishing path. Yeah. And then there's another different story, and then of the child's experience. And then there's a complexity of this time difference. Yes. A child is a little one, and it may come out much later on. Yeah. Okay, yeah.
And I think when we were talking at it a couple of months ago, Ali, you said, you talked about multiple narratives. And I thought it was actually a lovely way to kind of reframe this space, because we have the overarching story that is alcohol misuse in this country. You have the experience of the person who's been through alcohol misuse or is currently going through it. And we really do need to stigmatise that. And I think for far too long, anybody who's had a difficulty with alcohol, it's been, talked about in terms, a lot of judgmental and moralistic overtones. And I think we really, really need to move away from that, because we now know that at the root of most addiction is trauma. That's not someone's fault. And I think if we can hold it in a non-fault and a non-binary way, and just holding the two narratives as they are, that may be a way of moving forward in a compassionate way, compassion for the person who has a difficulty and compassion for the person who has been impacted.
Well said. Here's to that. And I think in a way that's what even this evening, we have you, we have Ash, we have our third contributor here we have different voices and stories. The experiences are different, even though there's a common theme. In this room, we will have many different experiences. And can we have spaces where all of that difference can be heard? And even, it could be even more, there could be even more diversity than we're inviting this evening. I was thinking just the way you described that and having the compassion there. I was actually thinking almost that multiplicity is inside ourselves as well, and that particularly when there's been trauma. But it just maybe to lead into, what would you like? How did you approach this? And what are the ways that have worked for you? I just have an inkling that maybe your beautiful, compassionate way is a part of that. But what would you say to that?
Well, I suppose because I got into difficulty with my mental health, I did initially explore that first, and through that got to the root of what was, fueling everything. And very much like Aisling's experience, psychotherapy was huge for me. I was very, very lucky to meet someone I could work with, someone I could trust. And I often feel that I've become very disconnected. Even though I have very, very good people in my life, I was very disconnected from myself and from them and for everything. And it was like she enabled me to come home to myself and to where I belong, which is with my family. So it was a major one. The other thing I mentioned was that because I was suffering from a depression, I did need to take medication. And I know there's a lot of, people have different views on it. But one of the things that I did need to take it, and one of the things I discovered was that I have an absolute terror of addiction, and that I maybe have pushed, the no medication too long. I was just too terrified to take it. So I needed a huge amount of reassurance around that. But I suppose as you mentioned I've been practicing mindfulness, and that became a really, really helpful way to move on. It wouldn't have been enough on its own to deal with the depression, but I think it enabled me to gather up all the awareness that I had gleaned from psychotherapy and in effect become my own psychotherapist. And also, as those of us who've been through the experience of having difficulties in childhood, when you come face to face with it, you realise that you've lost a childhood. So you have a backlog of grief to deal with. And I remember one day being out on a hill walk, which I absolutely love. And I was out on this beautiful June evening, and I was really struggling. And it was a stunning evening, and aware that, things are difficult. And then 6 months later, we were out doing the same walk, and it was freezing cold, it was horrible. And yet things had lifted. And I was aware of how, our inner worlds and our outer worlds diverge and sometimes converge, but they change. And the hills for me have become a bigger space where I can place things. And I often think it's a bit like if somebody said for medicinal purposes, you have to take a teaspoonful of salt every day. And most of us would find that difficult. But if you were to put that salt into a glass of lukewarm water, stir it around and take it, it wouldn't be great, but it would be a lot easier. And pain is exactly the same way. The amount of pain we have remains the same, but it's the spaces that we put them in that can ease things. Because ultimately we need to move through it. You can't push away from it, and you need to move through it in a way that doesn't overwhelm you. Mm-hmm. So I think those things, and then very much like Aisling was saying, finding things that you like, because there are people and places and activities that give you energy, and people and places and activities that drain you of any energy. And I think if we've been through, adversity in childhood, we need to lead a healing life. It's not an optional extra. We all need to, but it's not an optional extra. So, I think, and aligning yourself with nature, you begin to find that, the one unchanging law of nature is that life is ever changing, and that opens possibility.
Oh, it's beautifully said. And to have this, I know that obviously mindfulness is something many of us have had the chance to learn, but then this experience in nature, it's almost the same, isn't it? And you can be able to share that with both of those experiences and encourage us. Barbara, any final words? Just really, I guess, to anyone who might have had an experience similar to yours and be sitting there as an adult, what advice would you give?
Well, funny, I always feel that it's important to have hope, and yet I have an ambivalence around hope, because when I was going through depression, I would hear people, speaking in hopeful terms, and yet things were just so bleak at that time. It nearly felt like a denial of my experience, even though it wasn't, and I knew it wasn't. And I was recently reading a book called A Flat Place by Noreen Masood, and she was someone who'd come through a lot of adversity, and towards the end of her book, she was coming to terms with the possibility that she might never heal. And she wrote a few sentences that I thought were incredibly beautiful, authentic, and paradoxically very hopeful. So I brought those this evening just to share them with you, because they really did resonate a lot with me. And she said, "We must make a life inside the worlds that we find ourselves in. It's not for me to say whether I'm permanently broken. But if I am a damaged landscape, and I never rise into the peaks or falls, into the troughs of desire, energy, response, connection that other people experience, then that's all right. Something new has been made. In this space, there's life." And I think what Noreen Masood was saying primarily to herself was, and by extension then to us, her readers, that wherever we are in relation to our woundedness, then that's okay. And I really do believe that it's in that wounded space that we meet life in all its complexity and with all its ambiguities. So those are the words I'd leave you.
Barbara Whelan. So just another moment, I think, to take a breath and take all of that in. I feel like I'm in the luckiest position here, getting to talk to dear friends and feel this, actually feel the hope in what we are exploring by not shying away from what's so hard. But there's life there. That's what's coming through for me. So inviting all of you to, I hope you're also enjoying what's being shared, that there's bringing things for you, and just to kind of guide where we are in the evening. So we are moving into the third and final conversation, and then we'll come into a sort of closing open conversation, and for those who are still with us as we come towards an end. So maybe just gathering ourselves to see if we take in what we heard from Ash, then moving into Barbara's story that she shared, and then maybe take another perspective and perhaps something slightly different. Now, you may be looking around the room or looking at the front row and thinking, where is our third guest contributor? Where is this person? What on earth is Sally talking about? So I will reveal in a moment. But this person, maybe I'll give it away by starting to describe who they are. They are a multi-instrumentalist, a musical intuitive. They're also studying neuroscience. They're an NLP practitioner. They have a big background in health and in well-being. It is the amazing Eileen Beamish. Come out from behind the harp. Thank you so much. And maybe just to say, I talked about Celtic Grace. So Celtic Grace is your organisation, it's your work with David Williams, the flautist, and Barbara's dear partner. So they are a veritable ensemble. And I know that you perform in many spaces, including spaces related to this work, which I've heard about already. And also you lead well-being yourself, using your harp and using all of your own experience and your work, your trauma-informed approach to really work with groups. So we're delighted to have Eileen not only delighting us with the art and with the music, but a chance to also have a conversation with you. And I know normally you'd probably be leading this yourself, but it's an honour to have you as a guest here.
It's nice to be in this seat, Ali. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. So I think I need to take a moment just to take this in this transition. I think because of this, because of your multipleness in your own work, but then to sort of take it into the kind of conversations we're having tonight, which is also looking back to childhood experience and then bringing that into the present day and opening up this, how are these experiences in childhood impacting us? So I know, and as I was saying, we've all had different experiences, but I think from what you've told me, there's resonances in your own background. So yeah, just anything that you would like to say of what was your experience as a child in family and how does it connect to what we're sharing this evening?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a family where there wasn't actually alcohol in the house, but my older siblings will tell me that my father had alcohol problems and he gave it up very abruptly, but to my knowledge, he didn't get any support. So he had a lot of behaviours of someone who had alcoholic issues and had trauma underneath it. I mean, my studies would tell me all of that. But that's very, very difficult to live with because you're witnessing a lot of physical violence, a lot of domestic violence as a child. And I suppose, you know, what resonated with me listening to Ash and Barbara, where I've just written down some things, certainly the silence, the whatever you say nothing was sort of the golden rule, no matter how horrific things got. And I suppose the other thing is, I've written down here, you know, for me, when one actually practices not talking about something for long enough, then it was really almost impossible to begin talking about it because all of my training had been not talking about it. So even talking about that in a safe spaces later in counselling and psychotherapy was really difficult to begin with because I really had no training to do that, no language to do that to begin with. And it made me appreciate more when someone described something horrific and it said it left me speechless, which is like our words are very description of something, you know, deserts us. And that can leave us very isolated. So I suppose that was certainly something that resonated. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The other thing I suppose that resonated, and maybe you'll be asking me about this as well, is what impact those kinds of experiences had on me. Now they certainly had profound and lasting experiences on my siblings, but that's really for them to talk about. But I could see that in their physical and in their mental health around me. And I suppose as I studied the phenomena more of trauma, I could see how these early experiences were shaping them and almost inevitably leading them into those kinds of conditions. But for me, I think how it shaped me was, there were the feelings of terror, the feelings of unpredictability, the feelings of powerlessness, the feelings of being isolated, being on my own, even in a big family, of actually that feeling of being on your own and that feeling of you're going to have to deal with this yourself. You know, your siblings, nobody's going to come and rescue you here. emotionally or physically, because you could see that people bigger than you were getting overwhelmed themselves, so you weren't going to have much of a chance. So I thought to myself, what were those sort of the early, I'll call them trainings, because really without realizing it, they were early forms of training in my nervous system in exactly the same way that I speak with a northern accent, you might have noticed, because I grew up in the north of Ireland and people around me were talking like this. So I just picked up their voice. And I think when I grew up in a place where these behaviours were around me, something in me attuned to that and tried to cope in those sort of scenarios. So I ended up with a kind of a distorted set of, I'll call them beliefs and expectations. So some of the core beliefs that got set, I would say like jelly, thank goodness, not like concrete, but like jelly for the time being. I'll call it version 1 of me, because I've done computer science, so I call these versions 1. You know how you can upgrade your phone? Well, I think we can always go for another upgrade. But I think what the early software that landed in my nervous systems was feelings of worthlessness, because I could see how my siblings were being treated. I could see how my mother was being treated. I couldn't see how that was valuable. And therefore, as a child, you think that it's you. I think the other thing was an overdeveloped sense of responsibility, because when you're very small, you think you can do something to control this, and you can't. The other thing it did was, I think it set me up for early on for not having any appreciation of what boundaries were, or even what did a healthy relationship look like, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, where's the start and the middle and end of what's acceptable. There's really no early training for that. And so it didn't surprise me. I mean, I'm saying this all dispassionately because I've processed a lot of this now, with a lot of things which I'll share later. But the predominant feeling, I think, throughout that time was a feeling of being unsafe. And I could really relate to what Ash was saying about the startle mechanism, the startle response, where just a pixel of a previous experience could result in an explosive over response to something. I really can appreciate that. And it took me a while to realize that I had PTSD as well. And I spent a long time recovering from that. Still probably working on that, but well recovered from that. So that impacted my early life, my adult life a lot, until I began to, as others have mentioned, I began to see those patterns in myself. And then, of course, I'm the only one that can change it. And there's an old saying, wherever you go, there you are. So as soon as I could see those patterns, I called it bumping into myself, because as soon as I could see a pattern that I was tripping on, I thought, there's something we can fix. There's an old saying that says, do not look to where you fell, look to where you slipped. It means like, forget that your face is covered in mud. Look what you tripped on and go, that was the belief, the expectation, the way of seeing that can be realigned, and then I can get that into a more settled state and I can move forward safely. It took me, I bumped into myself quite a lot before I figured that out. And that wasn't without help from a lot of places I'll share with you later.
Okay. I mean, maybe if I could just touch on the absolute bare bones of just getting the shape of it right for myself. So what you're saying is, as a child, when you grew up, actually your father was no longer an alcoholic, but he had been one, and there was violence in the home. It was it was the predominant thing of all of this was feeling utterly unsafe.
Yeah.
And then, as you've so beautifully described, the way it shapes you naturally as a being, as an animal, as a creature, as a child. Yeah. And I think through all of your work, you're able to see that very clearly and describe it for us. It's just so well said, and it's chilling to feel it, but it makes sense. It's the body and the mind and the heart are responding naturally to those dangerous conditions.
Yeah, I think what I realized when I started to study the science of it, and this is how music and language in particular became so central in my life and my work, is that my nervous system was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was trying to protect me. It was trying to help me to survive, but it had done it it had done it to its supreme, intelligence. and I, when I began to study people like Gabor Maté, book In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, and Vessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, and many, many others, Joe Dispenza's book, Bruce Lipton's books, all of this science. And of course, I studied pharmacology myself at university, but I also studied computer science. So I began to see this, and I'm only saying this of myself, I began to see that the patterns of beliefs and expectations that had been trained into me early on were working their way out in my circumstances and relationships, just like computer code. If then else is what I call it. It's like, if this condition arises, then my alarm system goes off, and then I do this, right? But I had to begin to see how that programming had done it and undo it using music and language.
And anything, I was just thinking, because I'd love to explore this. It's very striking, your work as an artist and your work as a practitioner. I mean, anything else just with the adult experience? I know Barbara had shared, for her, there was so much that she was achieving in her life, but there was a sort of a break point that brought back material that had to be dealt with. I don't know, in terms of this impact on you as an adult, is there anything, don't share anything you wouldn't like to share, but just, is there anything, how did that sort of present itself or cause you to shift into what is now your life's work as an adult?
I think there's always, when people describe a tipping point earlier on, there's always a seed, right? And so I suppose the seed form of it was, there was always music in our house. I had two brothers who were in a band. And I suppose music, I've written down here, was like my initial refuge when, dreadful things were happening. I would go and pick up one of the guitars that I was forbidden to go near because my older brothers owned them, but I would pick them up anyway. And I just found intuitively that I just felt better. I mean, I was thinking the Beatles were probably the early neuroscientists, because they will say, I want to hold your hand, right? And you realise that, see, when other people are in contact with you and somebody's literally holding your hand, it took me a few years to catch up with the science of that. You feel connected, you feel safe. There's so many wonderful things going on in your body when you're singing, when you're breathing in certain ways. Because I did that from, when I was a child, we would always sing when we were doing the housework. But I always felt better when there was music around me, and it took me a long time. Then I got really interested in adult life. I researched the science of music itself, and why does that do that, right? And I'll not go into all of it now, but I know that there is, I'll just say, I just call it dose. When you're listening to music you love, you're going to automatically release dopamine and oxytocin and serotonin and endorphins, your natural painkillers. And when you get that cocktail going, that is a really, really good feeling. And I suppose that's why people call it flow. So, those have all sorts of benefits for our mental health, our physical health, our emotional health. So I just knew intuitively, even when David and I have played at Marie Curie Hospice over the years voluntarily, I could see right in front of my eyes how people were literally lighting up, and as if I needed any further proof. So, I've done the practicals on myself. I always know that I feel better, and I know that it's quite hard for me to play music if I'm not in the right space. So I've got to get myself into that space either through the music or else, get myself calm first and then play the music, or let the music calm me. It's a bit like having a cat on your lap, if you like cats.
And is there anything then, because in a way the music was a bit like in Ash's story, the music was with you from a young age.
Yeah.
But you also had these horrifying experiences. You coming into your adult life. Yeah. There's the seed.
Yeah.
And there's the tip.
Yeah.
Like, how did music come up, and was there a moment you had to sort of shift the way you were approaching things, or things came up that you had to deal with?
Probably what's coming to mind is actually when I met David, because I met him when we were playing at a cross-community concert, which I'll not go into all the detail of it, but it was a time when I hadn't sung for a long time before that, and just many different things were happening in a long-term relationship which was going in the wrong direction. There was lots of characteristics of my home life that relationship shared. So I wasn't really in a good place at all, but I'd been asked to sing at this fundraiser, and literally, because I kind of buddied up I ended up months later, David and I got together, and he was a musician and I was a musician, just as the ladies were saying, we just played together. We were doing what we loved. And that's what I would say to people. Because you've got a buddy, it's like having somebody going you can go for a walk with, play music with, dance with. Once you have a buddy or a group, a community of support, if it's one person, two person, that makes all the difference. Someone who loves what you love, that is really going to make a big difference. So I think that was a turning point.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have a turning point that also has some beauty and preciousness in it. Yeah, and yeah, I guess what's also coming through is the importance of the arts. You know, we heard with Ash with her painting, with Barbara with her writing, or actually also her sacred practices as well, or nature, and here with the music. And I mean, we probably couldn't all hope to be a beautiful harpist in the way that you are. I know there's other instruments you play as well. But yeah, anything more to say for us all? Like how, in a way, music is a symbol of something as well. It's you don't have to be a concert level musician to access that, like you said, that calming, that softening, that well-being. But yeah, any other recommendations for all of us of pathways that we could be taking on similar journeys?
Well, I'm going to offer a few that are helpful to me, right? But I'd say what would override, what joins them all together are two things. One, doing what you love and absolutely staying with and being true to that. And then I would also say alongside that, just holding on to that awareness, this is very important for me, holding on to that knowledge, that with a capital K, that there is a dimension of me that is unwoundable. I'll call it unwoundable, was not touched, it cannot be touched by circumstances, conditions, events, right? And I call it the indestructible, incorruptible, eternal. And I believe we all have that essence within us, that no matter what has happened, that cannot, be, destroyed, corrupted, or, dissipate. So, but what, in terms of things that I have found helpful, I would say, for me, informing myself about alcohol and the harms, and actually trying to go to, in my case, like open AA meetings, actually just trying to get a handle on some information. Reading around trauma certainly has been really helpful for me, because it has helped me develop a lot of compassion for myself and for others going on the same journey, albeit they're on a slightly different journey. I would say find what works. What worked for me was medication for a while was important for me. Counselling was important. Psychotherapy, consistency of those things was very important. I would also say finding a community, I'll call it a community of understanding. Now, whether that is, for example, it might be the Rise Foundation, it might be Al-Anon for some people, it might be Women's Aid. I mean, I was thinking of Ash here, I wrote a letter to a woman in Women's Aid who had left 10 years before, but she had held a very senior position. And when I went in there for the first time, just not able to function. She said, "Here, come on, let me would you like a cup of tea?" She made me a cup of tea. It was only later I realised she was a very, very senior person, right? She just met me where I was. So I remember, I'll not go through the letter, but I said, "Dear," and I mentioned her name. You would think that if someone took 10 years to write you a letter that they didn't really appreciate what you did, but I do, right? And I began to tell her of all the wonderful things that had happened in my life and to explain to her that she had been part of that turning point. I got to meet her and we had lunch together. It was a wonderful time, right? So I would say find that community of support and understanding. I would also suggest, take your time. I've written down here, halt. Look, know your own needs and note them and meet them. Because I suppose what I was trained to do without realising was to ignore my own needs, to not have any needs, because other people's needs were always first. I mean, not second time or third, always first. That didn't matter if you're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, sort it yourself. And reach for help, ask for help. There's another one. Speak up, talk, don't isolate. Be gentle with the journey, don't try to do it all at once. Because I suppose I realised over time that what had happened to my nervous system and physical body was a chronic state of stress. I mean, at one point I was diagnosed with adrenal fatigue. And one of the ways I tried to escape uncomfortable feelings was overworking. I realise that now, so just one thing turns into another. So these are some of the ways these things kind of show up. So I'd say be gentle. And then the things that helped me were good food, good diet, things like Tai Chi and yoga and meditation, those things that I call it reconditioning the nervous system, getting out into nature. I'm in a choir. I've been in plenty of choirs. I volunteered in organic farm. I get good physical exercise. I've got I call them my families, my farm family, my choir family, my, whatever families I have, family of origin. But getting back into community and getting out of isolation is a really big help, yeah.
Well, Eileen, there is so much there. I'm actually really glad that this is being recorded, and I sort of wanted to note down all of those beautiful kind of reminders of what we know is how to be a good human. And I was just thinking of, you've spoken about the organic farm, just hitting one of the many things so beautifully that I actually went up to visit it up north of Belfast, and actually, just like your story, I was not having a good day on that day myself, and I came, and it was lovely to be in the nature. I really felt it's a beautiful natural environment, Helen's Bay, up next to Belfast. And then just sort of near the end, you sort of said, Ali, do you want a piece of apple cake? And it was just, I could have cried. It was just so lovely, and it tasted amazing. So I can underline these beautiful stories. We also heard it on the podcast this week when Marion asked Ash about, what's an important quality in a psychotherapist. She said, it's the person who greets you at the door. That's one of the most important things. So there's just so much in what you've shared. Eileen, I wonder, is there anything, I have a feeling that there might just be some final words or even a verse of a song or something. What would you like to leave us with?
I'll tell you what I'll leave you with. When I was just a short part of a poem that I was going to say I wrote, but it kind of wrote itself, as others have said. And I was trying to sort of figure out, this trauma recovery journey, right? But the last part of it, it was almost as if my left brain was trying to figure it out and my right brain was saying, listen, relax, I've got you covered, right? So it went, if I remembered, it says, it's like my right brain, my higher self was speaking to the other analytical part, and it said, whispering kindly to my own cognition with patient, tender recognition of its habitual impulse to interfere, the eager, well-intentioned and misguided engineer. Don't count or seek to classify. Better to rely on mystify. Did you seriously think you could box the sky? There's more to us than meets the eye. Surrender. Sip a latte, dear. I'm here.
There's just so much amazingness, beauty, inspiration in dear colleagues and friends and all of us gathered here. I didn't even know that, but just feels so rich. So yes, we'll do some thank yous at the very end, but just feeling so appreciative of these 3 incredible conversations. And I think I can stand up off the chair. You may all be wanting to move as well and have a little change of scene to bring us into the final section of our gathering. And shortly we'll then bring the formal proceedings to close and have another little tea or coffee or water or snacks for anyone who can stay with us and join with us. And what we're actually going to move into now, as I said, was, I guess actually just hearing the beautiful music, I wanted just to invite a reflection of what does this bring up for you, like what we've heard this evening, and also particularly maybe giving it a shape around what has been healing for each of us. We all have different stories. Myself, I didn't have alcoholism in the home, but I also am, as you were hearing, I feel I'm trying to be on a healing path, and there's so many ways, and it would be wonderful to share that. So we'd love to have a conversation around that. So just sparking your minds to see if there's anything there you'd feel like sharing. But there is a little bit of structure as well, which is I've been looking over at the amazing Marion Rackard, who's here in the audience tonight, unusually. But we thought maybe as we come into the whole group conversation just for the last 10 minutes or so, we're going to ask Marion first, just your reflections on all you've heard this evening, where that takes you, and maybe also just to kind of open up the space for the rest of us. So, Marion Rackard.
Thank you. Thanks.
gosh, Ali, it's really difficult to know where to start. But I am sitting here just full to the brim with delight, sadness, hope, and immense gratitude for the gifts we've been given here this evening. I'm really conscious of all the people who are in this room who have not yet spoken and who are listening with an ear of recognition or an ear of, you know, perhaps darkness and loss. And I think that grief is changed a little tonight in terms of the hopefulness that what we've heard from each of the speakers, from Ash, from Barbara, and from Eileen. There's nothing I can add. I have lists myself, but I'm not going to attempt to go near any of them, other than to say that I am just so thrilled that Silent Voices is meeting its aim, which is to create these conversations. Because, as Barbara said, it's extremely difficult to get this narrative out into the public arena. It's impossible. It's too pervasive. It's too overwhelming. But the actual presence of individuals speaking their truth is just the business, you know, in terms of trying to make this. But how is it heard? So I'm really thrilled that we have this opportunity tonight to maybe open up a little more. I know how difficult it is, especially for people who I'm familiar with this issue because I've worked in the issue. I grew up with the issue. I've done my personal work and continue to do it. But you know, the sense of hope for the future in terms of what is possible. And I really do believe in what Barbara mentioned about, you know, that the light really happens in the wounded spaces. The ability to really open up one's heart to the grief, to the loss, to the anger, to the heartache, really, of what could have been. And that could have been, we did hear so many examples of happiness tonight, you know, through the arts as well. That's the other piece that struck me, was the beautiful, and we have this image from the very beginning. I think at meetings, at monthly meetings, we used to say, we have got to do this with the arts in some way, you know, and here we have proof tonight that we're doing it. So I have been so privileged to have, you know, had the opportunity to do the podcast with Ash and to, you know, experience the extraordinary person that she is, you know. So, Sheila, thank you so much for all the work you've done to make this week so special and tonight so special, and to the team. So that's all I will say. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. It's really helpful to just, to hear what you felt, and you're so a part of this. I listened to the podcast yesterday, and I feel like we really are in a week. And a week that happens each year. We really are in a year. We're in a number of years. This needs to keep building and growing. It shouldn't be silent anymore. And it's thanks to all of your work that it will not be the case going forward. So let's not be silent, but there's actually no injunction to speak whatsoever. In fact, we may have silent space. And some people have the little slips of paper. I will reveal the plan for that later. And if you didn't get one, I'll hand it out. But maybe in these last moments that we have together, it is the way we were holding this evening, we're hearing stories from our guest speakers who are offering. But it would be wonderful to hear other things that are coming up for those of us here in the room, if you like. So other things that are coming, sparked by what we've heard, other healing pathways that may have helped you or helped someone you know, or maybe questions around, not so much questions to speakers, but questions this might be raising for you. So yeah, opening up for any voices, any more voices. Yeah.
I'd just like to say, you asked at the start, you asked at the beginning, why we were here. And I suppose we're here as colleagues and friends of Marion, and we wanted to support her for the evening. But more than that, just from my own background, I'm a therapist and a counsellor. I work in addiction, work with families and individuals who are struggling. And I think tonight has really helped me understand the impact addiction has in a way that I haven't heard before, and I thought I heard many stories many times, but it was very powerful and very moving. And it reminded me too that I find myself in my work, meeting with individuals and their partner or parent or son or daughter who is still struggling. And as an intervention, I always tend to go to the individual and ask the question, do you think your partner or your dad or your mum understands the impact their drinking is having on you? And invariably people say, no, not at all, not at all. And I ask the question quite intentionally because I think it's a really important question. And I do almost expect what the answer is going to be. Because I think in terms of working with individuals who are struggling, until they understand the impact their drinking is having on somebody they care about, then I think they're more inclined to address it. And that has really helped tonight. I think it's kind of confirmed that for me in terms of my work. But it's been a privilege, so thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being here. And actually that was the power of a therapy process has been really spoken to by our contributors tonight, and to hear you speak from the other side, and that also this conversation has been enriching for you in your work is wonderful to hear, so thank you. Other reflections, yes.
Thank you so much, everybody who shared. Thank you, Eileen, for inviting me to come along. I grew up with two alcoholic parents. They were heroin addicts at the beginning, and then they turned to alcohol, and I wrote a book about it. And in my book I say I much preferred heroin to alcohol because at least they were quiet and the violence wasn't there. And something that I experienced in my own home, and the consequence. I think there is there are a number of versions of me stuck in moments that I experienced as a child, that I have spent a good part of my adult life trying to reach. And there are still some pieces of me in a glass case that I'm still struggling to reach. But the thing that my parents' addiction stole from me was my capacity to love and to feel love more than anything else, because of the lack of value that I felt, the over-responsibility, the trauma, the fear, the inability to sit still or trust. And I sometimes think we don't name that, because as an adult or a teenager then, like Eileen really explained it really well, the program becomes so set. And the complexity in my life is then I used alcohol myself and became my mother, which then makes it all so complicated, because the one thing I didn't want to be was her. The gift of healing has been the best thing I've ever taken the time, and I fail at it all the time. I think people need to know that is not a single path. There will be many moments where, when you're trying to become better or change, where it feels like it's all failing. And I think the final piece that I just want to say is forgiveness has been the gift that I've given myself. And that's been really difficult, But I genuinely, when I was able to forgive my mum, particularly my mum, because let's be real, we hold women to much more account than men in alcoholism. An alcoholic mother is much worse in society, and that makes it harder for her to recover because of the shame. But forgiving my mother without accepting that it was okay has been a gift that I continue to give to myself. And I choose that now because I don't want to carry as much as I already carry. I don't want to carry any more and be responsible for any more. And so, the other thing I'll just say, finish on this, that I genuinely know that when I was born, my mum wanted to love me. And when my son was born, when I was 15 in a hostel, I wanted to love him too. And sometimes it's not a choice. It really isn't a choice. And that is a gift to have that mindset for me. And not everybody has it, but I just wanted to share that. It's been a hard journey.
Thank you so much. And I was thinking, I'm sure most of you know, but it's Dr. Katrina O'Sullivan, writer of Cllr and academic in this field. And it's just, thank you for what you shared. I think particularly this, to hear the healing that's possible, but also we can fail, and that's okay. But it's still worth going on that path. So thank you so much. Other experiences or offerings to share? Oh, yeah. Oh, so you just hold it and then speak it.
I suppose, first of all, thank you very much for a really enlightening evening. And I suppose a bit of me is kind of shocked that this is the beginnings of people revealing their stories and speaking out. And I suppose my comments are really to Colm and to anybody else who has influence in the halls of power. I suppose I was struck, Colm, by your introduction and how you referred to being in people's homes and being able to see the effects of alcohol misuse. And I suppose, listening to the three people that spoke here this evening, there are three very articulate people who were very resourceful and brave in being able to seek out and to follow through in getting help and support for themselves. And I suppose my thoughts are with the people who haven't been able to do that, or perhaps have tried and the services haven't been there, or they've had to be on a waiting list and so on and so forth. And I suppose it strikes me that somehow it feels like the responsibility is sometimes maybe on the individual to find those to get themselves back on track and to lead a fulfilling life. And I suppose I'm linking with that the statistics that were given at the beginning of 200,000 children affected by parental alcohol misuse and 1 million adults. And when you bring it down to, this binary between qualitative and quantitative, I mean, governments understand costs of things. And when you think of the cost of the untapped, unrealized potential of all of those people to our country, it just beggars belief why there aren't more supports in therapy, in support for the arts. And I know there is more of a movement, particularly after COVID, that the government is putting more of a focus on arts. But it just strikes me that surely that's a no-brainer, that we should be funding these things so that our country would not have these 1 million plus traumatised people, not to mention the next generation of traumatised people. And I was struck very much by, in my job, we used to run a community addiction module, and invariably the thing that was impressed most on the participants was a speaker that came and talked to them about fetal alcohol syndrome, and how unaware most of the participants were on the small amount of alcohol taken while pregnant and the impact that it could have on the children. And I suppose I'm linking that back to what Eileen was saying about, it's not when you fall, you're looking back or you're looking upstream And surely we have a duty to try and prevent that happening, that would somehow, that some money should be put into this, that everybody is aware of the impact of drinking while pregnant, to stop the cycle, I suppose. Thank you.
Well said, so needed. So maybe a last voice. Is there anything else that's there? I think you're absolutely right, Susan, there's a bigger picture of what is needed. And then there's also each of us as individuals, what we might be doing to, whether as practitioners, as professionals, on our own paths. And we have our own personal experiences that we've gone through. We have our adult lives as we are living in them now. Any other reflections that are coming out just as we bring this section to a close? I guess what I'm holding is this, our wish here is to be hearing, as Susan said, hearing these strong voices from our guests this evening of these voices of hope and courage, but that's not shying away from the real pain that is there and the strength that is taken to come through that. So that's the tension this evening. It isn't all a happy story. We haven't got all the supports that we need, and that we wouldn't want to pretend otherwise. We want to have a real conversation and hear real experiences. And I think that's what we've had this evening. And just to really take that this is something, maybe that's a part of these healing journeys, is to be genuine and true. We can genuinely look at these things, as frightening as it is. We can speak to it. We can speak to it in a therapy room. We can eventually we can speak to it in family. We can speak to it with loved ones that care about us. And we can speak to it in warm, healing, open spaces that I hope an evening like tonight is. So I hope that even though there was so much that's hard in what we shared, and yet I had this feeling of richness. And in Katrina's story as well, other stories that we've heard, there's this resilience and shiningness, and it gives a fire to, come on, country, come on, government, come on, we need what we need. But let's take, I guess, inspiration from our colleagues here tonight, and to take it onto our own journeys and to the people whose lives we might affect and we might connect to. So I will suggest we take that energy into perhaps the small coloured papers and the pens that I referred to, and I have some more here. Did anyone not get a little coloured paper slip and pen? I know this. Right. Do you just want to take one of those? You're from Smarmore, isn't it? Yeah. What was your name again? Keith. Nice to meet you. And Paddy. Hi, Paddy. Yeah. Oh, well, I was looking up about it after. Okay, so, and yes, no problems if you need to leave. Thank you for being here. Yes? Did you get in your background? Yeah. And here's a little special pen. Try it. Okay, so if everyone's got their piece of paper and their pen at the ready. Okay, wonderful. And I think that part of our idea around this was there. Oh, sorry. And just there's a nice pen there if you want to take underneath. Yeah, it's up to you. Okay. Sheila, did you get one? I think the most important woman in the house needs one. Okay. And I think so this is actually working with colleagues here. There's just been so much creativity. And I think that's what as Marion sort of drew it out, to me there's a real connection between art, between making, between creativity and healing and connecting all those multiple parts that Katrina spoke to, that they actually start to all come into the circle together. And so this was an idea, I think it was inspired by both Ash and by Eileen, and the kind of things that I love doing as well, but I was kind of inspired by them to actually get on with it. And also recognizing that we aren't going to all speak in this kind of, we're holding things inside us. It's not necessary that we need to speak it out. So I'd like you to take anything that might be there for you and to put it on the paper in the form of a wish. We thought we could close this evening with a wish that I would suggest it could be a wish for yourself. something that you wish for yourself, inspired by tonight perhaps, or from having been here tonight, for going forward. Or it could be a wish for someone you love. It could be a wish for someone in your life. It could be a wish for someone you work with. It could be a wish for someone you don't know, but you know are there. Like Susan saying, we know there's many, many children in our world. There's many people struggling. There's so much need. And put down on that paper what you wish for yourself or that loved one or that unknown person as we leave this evening. And just to let you know what's going to, as you're writing your wishes, just to let you know what's going to happen with these wishes, if you like, is I have the ceremonial goldfish bowl of the Mansion House, thanks to the Lord Mayor, even in absentia. And we'd like to collect all of these in here. I am going to be ceremonially setting fire to them and then scattering them into the Irish Sea. So if you would like your wish to be sent off in that kind of a ritual, which is the kind of thing we like doing around here, then that's what you can do. Or you can just fold it up and keep it close to you. So as we have the beautiful music playing already, I'll just give a moment for you to just, if you haven't done already, write your wish down and then feel it in your heart. Be inspired by the music to let that wish have real energy as it goes out. And if you're done, you might want to start folding it up, and I will come and collect any wishes from those who would like to put them into the shared pot for this evening. No fish were harmed. I'm not opening these or reading them or anything. It's really a ceremony just for us. I bought the pens for us. Any more for now? Okay. All right. So, asking any last wishes, I'll collect them, or you can come up and give them at the end. And so, with this, I think it would be good to close as we began. We gathered our intentions. We had incredible conversations. We touched our hearts, and these wishes will be sent forward. We're feeling them sent forward in ourselves. They will be physically sent off into merge with the sea and the wind and all the elements. And with that, really wishing that each of our pathways flourishes going forward, and that this work does, that we can actually really help all those in need who are coming after us, and the children that are going to grow up and hopefully step into some of these healing pathways, just like the ones that we were talking about this evening. So with that, just thanking you all so much. As I said, I mean, there's so many people to thank, but really, Alcohol Action Ireland is who has brought us here this evening, as we see represented right in front of us. And thanking very much our incredible guest contributors who really opened up the conversation and helped us really address these things together. Thanking the entire team that got us to be here in the Mansion House. But most of all, thanks to all of you. I just had the privilege of sitting out here and seeing the space of us gathering and knowing that we were gathering about something good. We're having a good conversation. We're making a difference. This matters. And just wishing that everything that has come from tonight helps us all flourish on our paths. Thank you so much, everyone. Good evening.